And for this year's opening presentation, I have selected a topic that I think is going to become very, very relevant in the next 12 months. I've labeled the presentation Unleashing the Power of Data Democracy, Navigating the Era of Big Data. And what I will discuss in this upcoming hour is a number of points that we're all, I think, are confronted with on a daily basis, and which are going to give our society quite a number of reasons to debate about in the next few years. No matter where you are logging into, no matter what your laws and regulations say, we're all going to see quite a number of significant impact around artificial intelligence. So what I will discuss in this keynote session is the artificial intelligence hype. And we won't only go into the fact that this changes lives, obviously, but as many of you know, I'm one of the guys from a content perspective. So I'm also going to explain to all of you how generative AI actually works. Most of you will have played around with it, but not a lot of people understand what is happening underneath the hood. And in today's session, I'm going to clarify that a little bit. After that, I'm also going to explain the relationship between AI and big data, because obviously this relationship is very strong. And after all, this is a big data conference. Last but not least, I will make the step towards data democracy, as well as a number of data democracy best practices to showcase you exactly how you can address some of the challenges with AI that everyone is facing today. Once again, if you have any questions at any moment during the session, please feel free to ask, because we will be looking at those towards the end of the session. Good. Let me start with a very quick question to all of you. And that is the question, who has used generative AI? And for those of you who generative AI is completely new to, think about solutions like DALL-E or ChatGPT. Have you already had a chance to look into that and to use that? Let me launch the poll real quick and see what everyone thinks. There's three options. Answer A is not yet. I've not had a chance to look into it. Answer 2 is I have played around with it, but I don't use it for any business purposes yet. And the last option is I'm using it also for business purposes. See, a lot of votes are already coming in. So I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to answer this. So think about ChatGPT or similar kinds of products. Good. Few more seconds. Oh, it's going very, very quick. So let me close the poll and show the results to everyone. Good. We have kind of a mixed audience here. 41%, which is the majority, has played around with it, but is not using it for business purposes. Around 1/3 is using it for business purposes already. So that's going very, very quick. And 24% has not had the chance to look into it yet. So from that perspective, I think there's quite a large audience that is going to learn something new today. What do I mean with generative AI, and why have I chosen this topic for the keynote address today? Remember that last year in May, we hosted the 3rd edition of Big Data Days. And it is very fair and safe to say that our world has changed a lot in that only limited period of 1 year. And to illustrate that, let me show you a very interesting graph that showcases the number of days it took for companies to reach 1 million users. And I think we're all familiar with companies like Netflix, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, Spotify. But if you look at ChatGPT, it only took them a few days in order to reach 1 million users. It's safe to say that this has been one of the fastest growing revolutions that we have experienced in the last year. And it's going to have a very profound impact on the way that we operate and the way that we work. Let me illustrate with that. And I think the effect of this illustration is probably best displayed by a picture that has gone viral on the internet. You might have seen it or you might not have. And this gentleman that you see on the screen is or should be a familiar gentleman, which is the Pope. And this picture that you see on the right has been created with generative AI. As most of you will know, the Pope typically has a preference for white clothing. And here he was depicted in a puffer jacket. Why is this picture so incredibly relevant and did it go viral all across the world? It is because a great number of people actually believed, because of his style and the way that he is frequently presented, that this picture was real. This is, however, the opposite of truth. So on this picture, it was clearly generated by artificial intelligence. The Pope never wore this jacket, nor do I think it's very likely that he would ever wear one. But it showcases a very significant point of the way that our world is changing. Because everyone today has the opportunity to create images, videos, text, without needing to have a very significant background or any coding expertise in order to create this. And that will have serious implications, because it means that for a lot of people, truth, reality, what's real, what's fake is going to blur. So let's see some more examples of that and look at the way that this is going to have a profound impact. Generative AI is, and this is what we've seen in the first few days, a great tool to do all kinds of funny stuff. As most of you know, the internet is made out of cats, and one of the funny things you could do is create all kinds of imagery with chat prompts that give the opportunity to generate all these kinds of cute looking pictures. All in all, this is obviously harmless. The generative AI is also used for all kinds of design ideas. So here you see a picture of a design of a literally green building. And this can inspire the new generation of architects or people who are in construction to come up with all beautiful kinds of new ideas and can inspire them to think differently, which is, I think, a very useful use case of generative AI. And last but not least, here you see also a specific watch with all kinds of futuristic details. So a lot of people use these kinds of solutions in order to come up with new kinds of creative ideas. And that's, I think, especially when generative AI started, one of the interesting and most useful benefits. But slightly after that, around 1 or 2 months after the launch of these kinds of fun use cases, we started to get into a debate around how to deal with intellectual property. And one of the ways I'm going to illustrate this is by looking at some of the works by the famous artist Banksy, who is a mystery around who it is, but that creates very significant, very provocative, sometimes politically motivated artworks. And his artworks are worth millions of dollars around the world. So his intellectual property is very, very valuable. And to illustrate this, let me showcase 2 different pictures here on the screen. And I don't know if you're a Banksy fan or if you've ever seen his painting, but the question that I have for all of you is, which one is real and which one is fake? And are you able to distinguish between the 2? I can tell you that one of them I took from the internet, and the other one I generated myself by putting in a specific script online. And for those of you who might recognize or might not recognize it, the picture on the right is actually the original work. And the rabbit that I composed for Chinese New Year in Asia is actually a fake one. But what you might immediately showcase here is that it becomes very difficult in terms of style, look and feel, to differentiate between these 2 different products. And that brings up the question, how will we deal with intellectual property in the future? Is a particular style protected? Are particular books or works of art protected? Are blueprints, building designs, books, course materials, are those protected? Because through generative AI, it becomes super and very easy to address or imitate or make copies of original work. And with just a few seconds, I was able to create this picture that you see in the middle, which could, if you would see it on a wall somewhere, very quickly and truly be considered a work by the artist Banksy. Another development that we have been seeing in the last few months is that people were very quick to also start looking at ways to use generative AI from a more political point of view. And these are two very famous pictures that were spread around social media in the last few months. The first shows Donald Trump as he is likely to be, or as you saw on the picture, is arrested by cops. And on the right-hand side, you see a political image of one world leader paying his respects to another. Please note that both of these pictures are completely fake, and they have been generated with these AI kinds of solutions, but their impact is very profound. Why is this relevant? Well, it makes the question what is real and what is fake very, very much indistinguishable. And in fact, many people with these pictures actually thought that these pictures were real, while indeed they were actually fake and generated by a simple script. And I think that these are some of the challenges that we're going to be seeing in the next few months and maybe even years, is what is a responsible way of artificial intelligence, and what is the role that companies and individuals play into that. So I thought that this would be an interesting perspective and keynote to start with, because these are some of the real challenges that we're facing today. So in summary, many things that we have seen since last year have significantly changed. The world, as we know it, is changing very, very rapidly. And the one main takeaway that I would like to give you this morning is don't underestimate it. There are very significant benefits to artificial intelligence, and it's going to bring a new wave of productivity. It can help solve problems, it can make sure we become more productive, and even, as I showed with some of the examples, more creative. But there is also a very significant downside, and I think most organizations and governments have not figured out how to deal with that. The number one issue with generative AI is going to be around intellectual property. IP regulations need to be redefined, and what we are going to need to redefine what an original thought, work, or idea would actually mean. The second main challenge is that it will become very difficult for people in general to distinguish between artificially and human-generated aspects. As we've just shown with the pictures of the political leaders, there is quite a significant risk that AI might spread misinformation, or that we are going to believe things that were actually not true. This will have a very serious impact for media, news, politics, and communication in general. And that brings me towards one of the main points that we need to consider during this two-day event. How are we going to deal with it, and how are we going to make sure that it remains a safe tool to be used? My number one piece of advice is, in order to use AI responsibly, you need to know how it works. And that means beyond just using it. And that brings me towards big data and the main theme of this conference. Because if you think about it, generative AI is a big data solution. These tools would not be possible if it were not for all of the data behind it. And that's what I would like to illustrate with you in the next few slides. Before I do that, let me take a quick poll. Anybody here knows how generative AI is actually working? Let me launch the poll. Good. And again, there's no wrong or right. I'm just really trying to assess what is the knowledge of the audience. Answer 1 is I have absolutely no idea. Answer 2 is I know it has something to do with machine learning. And answer 3 is I understand the underlying models exactly. Good. I'm going to give you a few more seconds, and then I'm going to close it. Good. And this is indeed an interesting result. Good. I think it's on the screen right now. So majority of you says, well, I know it has something to do with machine learning, but that's about it. 12% has absolutely no idea on how it works. And another 12% says that they understand the underlying models beneath it. And the reason I'm using and I'm showcasing this poll is because it is so very relevant to understand the tools that you're using on a day-to-day basis. Because these tools will have such a massive impact on the way that we work, live, and on society in general, I think it's very important that you know a little bit around that. So in the next 5 minutes, and I'm sorry if I'm going into a little bit into technical detail, I'm going to show you how generative AI works and what the underlying model beneath it is. Note that generative AI models use neural networks, and neural networks are a form of deep learning algorithms that are able to identify patterns through a number of neurons. And the structure of a neural network is shown here on the right-hand side of the slide. And shows that basically we're putting in data within the input layer, and then through a number of calculations that are hidden within the middle layers, we're moving towards a picture, a new text, or any kind of output that we're looking into. These kind of neural networks are AI models, and they have the ability to predict, they have the ability to generate, and they have the ability to make new compositions based on tremendous input data. Unfortunately, for the sake of time today, I don't have the time to go into the details of how neural networks work, but I've given some lectures on that previously. So if you're interested in that, look at our Big Data Framework YouTube channel. But the main thing that I like to show you today is that in order to use and train a neural network, what all of the generative AI solutions do is they build a foundational model which other people, companies, or users can work in order to make a specific prediction. And the way that a foundational model is created is, if you look at the hidden layers, I've tried to augment it a bit, is that one of the main estimators and functions, and this can be around hundreds of thousands of data points, is that we're estimating the weight of a specific element or a specific input element. And that means that we would like to understand or make a prediction around how relevant a particular input is. And that input could be pictures, it could be words, it could be music, it could be audio, it could be documents. That really doesn't matter. But fundamentally, the way that an AI model, any AI model works, is by a vector of estimation of the different weights that are within the neural network. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that. So companies or organizations or universities that build neural networks are trying to find an optimal weight estimation, and they refer to that as a foundational model. These foundational models subsequently form the foundation for all kinds of different use cases. And that's also where the name GPT or Stable Diffusion is coming from. Basically, these are foundational models that have been optimized and trained by different companies. And in essence, that's a combination and collection of the different weight vectors that you see in a neural network. So I hope that that clarifies a little bit on what's happening underneath the hood. One of the common questions I also typically like to ask is, anybody know what GPT stands for? And this is also just a specific foundational model. GPT stands actually for Generative Pre-trained Model. And the reason that it's pre-trained is because that weight element that I just showed in the neural network is already estimated within the model itself. So therefore, you can very easily apply and use it. So if you're ever working with generative AI solutions, you will see that they're all based on a specific model. So the one that's probably available now is GPT-3 or Stable Diffusion. And by understanding this, you can start comparing these different models with one another. The GPT-3 model, because it's so popular nowadays, is basically outlined in a number of neural networks. And what you see on the left-hand side of this slide is that it actually consists of 12 different layers. And it's using a feed-forward mechanism to always estimate the validity, truth, and accuracy of all of the weights in the vector that I just mentioned. Later, I will give a lecture around GPT-3 and the foundation model that you see here on the slide, but this is actually what is happening under the hood. Ultimately, what these kinds of language models will do is make a specific classification of what the best potential output should be. And therefore, ultimately, it is a combination of a text prediction, so what is, in this case, the best potential text that needs to be generated, as well as what is the probability that that specific text will be the best answer, which is a classification exercise. So the combination of these two is the way that GPT-3 is working. And I think that in order to use these kinds of models responsibly, you should always have an opportunity to understand what is happening underneath the hood. Good. So that brings us towards the next question is then, well, why is this so much better than anything that we've seen before? And I always like to showcase that with two very important graphs. Machine learning models that we've known so far, or NLP trained models, because we're looking at a language model in this case, have been in existence for a very long time. But where GPT-3 is so incredibly different is the input data, the training data, the amount of data points that are used in order to do that. And here on the slide, you see that there's 175,000 or 175 billion different vectors that are being used in order to train the model. And that is significantly larger than any model that has ever been trained before. So the question then becomes, where is this data coming from? And what is then the relationship towards big data? And on the right-hand side, this is a graph that you can just get from OpenAI, is you see what GPT-3 is trained upon. So the number one input is Common Crawl. And Common Crawl is a non-profit organization that crawls the web and basically connects everything that's available on the internet. So if you ever wonder what data is being used within GPT-3, it's basically all the data collected since 2011 all the way up to mid of 2021. So 10-year period of time of all the data that has ever been created on the internet. So it's a tremendous data set that this whole model is trained upon. Therefore, you could say that if you think about the amount of data created on the internet in the last 10 years as a major library, this model is trained around all the knowledge that has been created in this library over the last decade. So it's very, very significant, and therefore it is working so well. Good. What I hope that you start to see is that generative AI is actually big data. It's completely driven by big data because it is using all of the data that has been used in the world over a 10-year period of time. Without big data, it means that generative AI won't work. And if you think back around the Enterprise Big Data Framework model, the model that you see on the right, and you've been part of previous conferences, you note that AI is basically the outer ring. You can only start with artificial intelligence in any useful manner if you already have major data sets structured, an architecture in place, significant processes in place in order to build upon that. So before you can do anything with AI, my main advice is always make sure that your underlying data and your big data sets are actually working. If the input data is accurate and truthful in general, then your predictions will become truthful in general as well. So before any use of AI solutions, make sure that the underlying data is going to be optimized. Good, so that brings us towards the link of the latest developments and generative AI towards big data. Then let me introduce the final topic and the title of this presentation today. Does anybody here then know what data democracy is? Let me put that on as a last poll for today. Good. Question here is, who knows what data democracy is? Is it something you never heard of? Is it, I think it has something to do with politics? Or is answer 3, yes, I can explain what data democracy is? Good, some mixed cases. 5 more seconds. Good, and let me stop the poll and showcase the results to everyone. Good. A significant majority does not know and never heard of this term. So that's really useful because it means you're going to learn something new today. Around 20% think it has something to do with politics, which is absolutely not true. And the third answer is I can explain what data democracy is 23%. So let me give you a bit of a definition around that. And it also means there's probably a lot of new people joining in the conference this year, because it was actually on one of the slides from last year. Data democracy is a society where people have access to data, understand it, and know how it's used in decision making. And the link between generative AI and data democracy is actually quite strong, because generative AI will have a very significant impact on everyone's lives. It's my very strong conviction that everything that you will see, read, listen to, view, in the future will be largely dependent on algorithms or technology if it's not that already. So it means that everyone needs to make up their own mind. If you want to know what to believe or what is real and what is fake, you need to have the ability to distinguish how work was created. You need to have the ability to make valid evaluations on saying this is true and this is false. And that means that in order to make sure that people can use AI responsibly in the future, everyone must have the ability to see through the data over time. And because generative AI is now coming towards companies, at the start of this lecture, I did a poll and asked who is already using it within their work environment. It's fair to say that data democracy is now becoming an enterprise responsibility. No longer just you as a person, it's a company that has a duty of care to make sure that these things are not used to any malintent, but that they're used in a responsible manner. So I want to update the definition from last year towards enterprise data democratization. And I've listed the slide here, or the definition here on the slide, because it's no longer just an individual's responsibility. It becomes the responsibility of every organization. And I've labeled it as an organization's practice to make sure that data is accessible internally within the company, but also to make sure that you educate all your employees on how to work with data. Because there is so much that can potentially go wrong with these kinds of solutions, data democracy is strongly becoming an enterprise responsibility. And that means that every employee should have access to relevant data, and they should know how to interpret and use it regardless of their technical background. So it does mean you also need to consider that even if people are not data scientists or have no idea how IT works. And that is going to be a fundamental shift that is going to be required next year. So you might now be listening and think, well, that's very easily said, but how do we do that? And I would like to end today's presentation with 3 best practices on how to start with enterprise data democratization. And the 3 elements that I think every organization should consider is to first start with establishing an internal data catalog. You need to know which data you control. You need to know how data is being used. And before you start any machine learning or AI algorithms, you need to know which risks are in your data set, how and where it's used, and what the authority of a particular data set is. Secondly, you need to establish an ongoing training program to fundamentally educate everyone around the pros and cons and how these technologies actually work. And last but not least, I think it becomes important and imperative that every organization should set up data ethics. That starts with relevant policies, but also with a body that is going to be responsible for AI in the enterprise. Let me briefly go through that because I see we're almost out of time. But the first thing that every company and enterprise should consider, if they're not doing so already, is to set up an enterprise data catalog. In an enterprise data catalog, you're combining all of the data that comes in and goes out of your organization, and you're in control over it. Means that you can decide who sees what, where data is coming from, what the quality of data sets is going to be, if data should be protected because of specific rules and regulations, and if you need specific vendors that are going to showcase you the data. The screen in front of you, you see an example of a data catalog, and I think it's for the next generation of companies going to be imperative that you're in full control of what is happening with your data. The second main key takeaway that I would like you to leave with is that every organization should have training programs. Training programs on how to use AI, training programs on how it works, training programs on how to use AI in a responsible way. Everyone in every organization should put focus on training and education, because next time that people see a picture that is generated by AI, that they have the question or they have the capability to ask why. Is this true or not? Are we looking at a true media picture, or are we looking at something that has been generated by AI? And take the example of the Pope. If you never seen this picture and you thought it was true, then it means that there is some training that's still required in your specific organization. And last but not least, my third main aspect, and this is slightly new, is that I think it's imperative that every organization starts thinking about how do they deal with data ethics. Because through AI and the underlying big data sets that are being used, you're going to come into ethical dilemmas. The classic one is always what we see with self-driving cars. If you need to make a decision between killing the driver or killing the passengers that are, let's say, on the street, you need to ultimately program that into a computer. So with AI, we're going to see a lot of ethical dilemmas coming up. And as an organization, you need to be prepared. What data ethics policy should do is look at how are we going to deal with ethical dilemmas, what will be the safe use of algorithms, and how is an organization going to be using AI on a day-to-day basis. This can only be done if people are becoming responsible for it. It means that you would need to set up a data ethics committee that will be safeguarding that towards the future. So with that, we are slowly but surely getting towards the end of this keynote. The main thing that I would like you to leave you with is the statement that big data is changing the way we live. And I hope that throughout this conference, you're going to learn on how to prepare for that, and that you take away a number of sessions and a number of ideas that explain exactly what can be done in order to deal with that. And if that's the case, then I'm quite sure that this conference is going to be a success for you. I would like to leave you with 3 parts of my personal advice on how I always go through conferences. And that is to always look for sessions that inspire you. Search specifically for sessions that you don't know anything about, just for inspiration. And also try to look for sessions which might be a little bit more technical than you're usually accustomed with, but that might challenge you. And if those are the 3 things that you take away and you get 1 or 2 valuable lessons from this conference, this Big Data Days 2023 is going to be a success. Thanks so much. Learn, be inspired, and enjoy the rest of Big Data Days 2023. Thanks, everyone.